What's up, guys? Coach Shelby here, and I'm here to answer your questions on what is the difference between speed training and conditioning, right? It's one of the biggest misunderstood questions. So check out what the real difference is. Hey guys, Coach Shelby here, and I'm back to the whiteboard to explain the difference between speed and conditioning. And this is one of the biggest, most misunderstood concepts in terms of training, is people thinking that speed and conditioning or explosiveness and conditioning are the exact same thing. Completely not true at all. And the biggest mistake you could make is actually trying to train for speed and essentially improve your top end and end up just getting in good, quote unquote, shape. So what are some of the common differences between the two, right? Well, one of the things is when you work on speed, you're really talking about improving maximal output, right? Essentially the greatest you can be at any one given moment, right? It's like that best day. So in terms of the first thing, the biggest difference is here is speed is your absolute maximum that you can go. Over here on the conditioning side, you're really talking about maintaining the maximal level you can, but repeatedly, right? So this is a repeated effort, and obviously you want to be as high as you can in terms of how fast you can go, but keep in mind that you can only go so fast when you have to keep going because you essentially deplete your energy system. That's the second thing. In terms of speed, when you talk about like the greatest athletes, in particular if you look at like track athletes, all of their speed training, not conditioning, but training to actually get faster, is about pushing the maximal level. In order to do that, you need a lot of recovery time, right? So recovery time matters a great deal, and essentially it is full recovery, right? How much time? We'll talk about that in a second. Over here under conditioning, you are repeating as much force as you can, but your recovery time never really lets you go back to full recovery. Essentially, you're trying to get as much back as you can as fast, but it's never to 100%. So you're always less than 100%, right? No matter how hard you try, you can't always run, slide as explosively as you want to. Third thing that kind of goes along with that in terms of the max and the full recovery from a speed standpoint is typically these bursts are give or take about 10 seconds actually, and that goes from an energy system standpoint, from a physiology standpoint, where you really can't maintain what would appear to be a maximal level for longer than 10 seconds because of the energy system that you are working. Over here under conditioning, you're actually going to be transitioning from energy systems. So you're going to be going from something that would be known as like a really anaerobic energy system, and you're going to start transitioning from anaerobic into a little bit more aerobic, and you're going to start kind of balancing those two out. So over here, your intervals almost always are going to be greater than 10 seconds, and at the same time, typically they're probably going to be more like 30 seconds to 45 seconds or even a minute, especially on the court when you talk about playing, right? Like you go really hard, you jog for a little bit, you go hard, you jog, you go hard, you jog. That will last oftentimes for a period in like the 30 to 45 second range before you really get a full break, right? Nobody ever lets you get fully recovered. The next thing we're going to talk about in terms of differences, again on the speed side, you think about how these start to mesh together, right? Your maximum output, because you have full recovery, you don't do it long because you need to essentially push that, is really what you are trying to do over here. Is if you were comparing yourself to an engine or a car, you're trying to increase the amount of horsepower that your car can create, right? You can only go so fast if you have a 150 horsepower Prius, versus if you're trying to compare it, right, to like a Lamborghini or something like that, with 300, 400, 500, 600 plus horsepower, you can't expect the speed to stay the same, even though from a conditioning standpoint, you can keep going at less than 100% over and over in a Prius, and ultimately, you might be better off depending on how long you go. That might actually be the choice, but not when you're trying to go fast. So over here on the fourth thing, we really want to talk in terms of the max speed, the full recovery, the time. you essentially are looking for a good work-to-rest ratio. And what's a good work-to-rest ratio for speed? Well, if you go 10 seconds, typically the minimum you probably would go is about a 1 to 6, right? So if you went 10 seconds, you would probably rest about 60. And really, you're probably looking at more of at least a 1 to 9. So if you did a 10-second sprint, you would give yourself about a minute and a half of full recovery so that every single rep was absolute, all-out, maximum effort because you're trying to push that horsepower. So we kind of lump these together and you kind of try to increase the horsepower, right? If you're at 300 horsepower, over here, right, you might only be at, I don't know, again, let's say 150, right? But you may be able to maintain your 150 over and over. This is 50% of this. At the same time, this goes up. Hopefully this goes up with it, right? Now go back to the work-to-rest ratio for just a second. If you're conditioning, you may be all the way down, even sometimes as much as a 1 to 1. Oftentimes you're working in like a 1 to 2 work-to-rest ratio. So if you go for 30 seconds, you may only rest 30 seconds, right? If you go for, even a minute, you may still only rest 30 seconds, sometimes even a negative work-to-rest ratio from a conditioning standpoint. And you still, again, should be able to somewhat repeat the maximal effort, but not in the same way that you do with the speed work. So that's just not realistic. To go back down to our horsepower example, though, of trying to improve it, with the speed piece, if I'm at 300 horsepower, and this is 50% of my max, right? We want to try to essentially repeat as much maximal output as we can. In order to increase my max, I need to get over 300 horsepower. That means I need to get to 301, 302, 303. As this goes up, hopefully so does my conditioning, right? And if you remember from my examples in the past, it's a lot like a glass, right? Where if you increase your capacity over here, the speed standpoint, and that's strength, explosiveness, all of that, the conditioning piece magically falls right in. So if I'm able to work myself up to 400 horsepower, right? 400 horsepower may mean, a 30-inch vertical. It may mean, being able to do a 1.5 times body weight pull-up, right? So 1.5 times body weight pull-up. It may also mean, a double body weight squat. It also may mean, you look at something like, let's just say for simplicity, let's just say a 1.5 times bench, right? 1.5 times body weight bench. All of these things are making your glass bigger. They are giving you the ability to create that 400 horsepower. Obviously, there's more to it than this. You've got the core piece, all of those other things, balance, movement come into play. This is just an example, right? I need to move this number to essentially move this, right? So this is the driving force behind it. All of that training, all of your strength training, your core training, your explosiveness comes from this side of the board. Meanwhile, back over here, if this is always 50% of my max, right, in terms of output, I am already boosting my capacity down here to 200. Now, from a conditioning standpoint, I can use 200 horsepower repeatedly over and over for longer intervals. That means that you essentially boost your conditioning purely by increasing your max. Now, this does not mean that you don't need to do any conditioning. Quite the opposite. You just need to pick and choose when and how much you do it and understand what you're actually training for. If you're as fast as you need to be, work on the conditioning piece, right? Or if you're going into your season or you have a big showcase or a big tournament coming up, I would definitely say focus on the conditioning piece because that is going to matter. You need to be in good shape going into your season. You need to be in good shape going into some of your summer tournaments, depending on